If you can dream it, we can help you create it. Welcome to the You Create podcast, the show that teaches you how to take the power and flexibility of a Stepcraft 3D CNC system and turn your ideas into reality. So let your ideas flow, because we want to know, what will you create?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the You Create podcast. My name is Eric Royer, and I wanted to thank you for joining me for episode number 9. I hope you guys have been making a lot of cool stuff, and I really appreciate you joining me here and subscribing to the podcast. Sorry, last couple weeks I haven't gotten to one. We've been really busy preparing for the holidays and we've acquired quite a few new customers. As a result of a lot of marketing we've been doing online, which is always a good thing, but it makes it a little difficult for me to get to the microphone here. And so I apologize, but I am going to try to step it back up to at least doing once a week here, beginning now. So this week, I wanted to talk about a couple of things. First thing I want to talk about is a fellow by the name of Bill Griggs. I met him years ago through the radio control model airplane community, and a couple of weeks ago he has a podcast called CNC Router Tips Podcast, and I encourage you to go listen to it, cncroutertips.com. It's a really good podcast. Bill's a great guy. He has a community on Facebook as well. If you just search CNC Router Tips, you'll find it, and it's a private group, but you could just click to join. He asked me to be on his podcast as a guest a couple of weeks ago, and I listened to the interview that he put together twice now, and it came out really, really well. I really appreciate him doing that for me and giving me a chance to talk about Stepcraft and some of the things that we do here, as well as some of the visions that we have for the company. So I will put a link to that particular episode in the show notes, but I do encourage you to go have a listen. And when you join the CNC Router Tips community on Facebook, and give Bill a shout for me. He's a great guy. So that being said, next thing I wanted to talk about was I finally got to cross something off my bucket list this past week. I've been a writer professionally for a good part of my life, mostly writing technical reviews and articles and stories and things regarding the radio control hobby community, which is the space that I came from prior to starting Stepcraft here in the U.S. So one thing I've never got a chance to do, though, is write a book. And given the last several months of conversations with customers and emails that we get and support calls and questions and things, I thought it'd be kind of cool to put together a book. So I started working on my first book called Start Your Own Business with an all-in-one CNC creation system. And I've launched a book 2 days ago now, and today is actually the 17th of December. So I launched on the 15th. And you can download a copy for free. It is going to the printer, so we will have printed copies available as well. But if you'd love to download a copy of this book, please go to stepcraft.us/ebook. And you could just put your name and email in, and you'll get a link to download it. And I'd love to hear what you think about it. The premise for the book was to address a lot of people who have ideas and don't know how to take their ideas and make them into a reality, specifically when it comes to being able to resell or start a small business, or a large business for that matter, based on your ideas. And from research that I've done, I've found that a lot of people have ideas. Every day you have an idea. And what stops most people is fear, lack of knowing how to take their idea and make it a reality, and finances. Those are usually the three things. So I can't help too much with the finance part, but I was certainly hoping to take some of the fear and provide a solution that is available to anybody to be able to do this. So, it's about 60 pages. It's not a huge book. It's certainly not a hard read. And it'll give you some highlights. I have some examples of some Stepcraft customers and some businesses that they've started. There's a lot of creative things that people are doing, and I'm really hoping that this book helps more people, whether they buy a Stepcraft system or whether they use the ideas for a system they may already have or another system that they're looking at. I'm hoping that some people find it useful. So I encourage you again, please go over to stepcraft.us/ebook and download a copy of it. There is no charge for it. So let's see what's on my list here. So the ebook, next thing is I wanted to talk about Lithophanes. I've been seeing a lot of posts online with people that are doing Lithophanes, and for those of you who don't know what it is, it's a process of which you take a photograph and using software, in this case I'm using Vectric Aspire, you convert the image into a toolpath, and what it does is it creates kind of like a negative. If you were looking at it, it almost looks like a negative, and it carves in 3D the photograph out of material. Two common materials that people use are the 1/4-inch Corian, white Corian, and there's another material that a lot of people, from what I'm understanding, and I actually bought some because I wanted to try it. It's called Candlestone, and I found a supplier online that I was able to buy 10 8x10-inch pieces of this material, and it cost me about $70 shipped. So it's not cheap, but it's not super expensive either. And what happens is when you carve the photograph into this material, it doesn't look like much. In fact, it looks pretty crappy when you're just looking at it, because it's kind of a negative and it's in 3 dimensions, and it's not that impressive. But when you apply a light to the back of it, the photograph just mysteriously appears. And so whatever you carved out of the material, the light kind of lights it up, and what it looks like is a black and white photograph, and the resolution is amazing. It's kind of neat because when you first do one, you're looking at it on your machine, you're like, oh, really? This is what I made, huh? Certainly not something you'd want to give as a gift. And then as soon as you apply that light, you're like, whoa, you're kind of blown away. That this is pretty awesome. I actually had a demo here the other day with a couple that came down from upstate New York, and I had a sample one that I had just done, and I showed it to them. I'm like, hey, check this out. Wouldn't you love to get this for a gift? And they were looking at me funny because it doesn't look like much, And then I applied a LED light to the back of it, and the look on their face was priceless. They were blown away that, like, all of a sudden this really nice high resolution black and white image appears. So the more I've been seeing these things, I said, well, I gotta learn how to do this. I gotta give it a try, and I have a gift idea that I wanted to do. So I put a piece of Candlestone on our Stepcraft 600 machine, and there's a couple things you need to do when you bring the image into Aspire. Now, I'm not going to go through a step-by-step here in this podcast on how to do it, because it's more of a visual thing as far as how to set up a Lithophane, but I am planning on doing a video to explain how to do it, because I think it's really important. Not only that, it's fun. It's a really cool thing to do with a CNC machine that I'm sure a lot of people don't know much about. So I will cover that in a future video that I will put together. Most likely it'll be over the holidays here when I have some little bit of downtime to work on some of this stuff. But when you bring the image in and you create the toolpath for it, you, much like any other Vectric program, you have to set your material dimensions. So the length and width of your material plus the thickness. And there's a setting where you can take the actual three-dimensional image, the photo, and you can recess it into the stock. And right when you start, it comes off level with the surface of the material. But what you need to do is bring it down into the material. The whole idea with the Lithafane is that the darker areas are less material is carved, if that makes sense. And the lighter areas, more material is carved. So when you shine a light through the back of the Candlestone or the Corian, the thin areas are going to be brighter, and that would represent the lighter area of the photograph, where the dark areas are thicker, which represent the dark areas of the photograph. So because they're thicker, less light can get through the material, and therefore it shows up dark gray or black on the final Lithafane. So in the first one I did, I made a mistake. I'd set it to 0.4 inches. 0.4 millimeters as far as a back thickness, and that was totally too thin. So what ended up happening was, as it was cutting, it actually broke right through the back of the material. It was too thin. So I've since learned the proper thickness to set that at for at least for a Stepcraft machine, using an 1/8 inch ball nose end mill, and subsequent ones that I did, came out perfect. And because you don't want to have too little thickness, obviously, because you run the risk of it being so thin that it breaks through, like I had to happen. But you don't want it to be too thick either, because then it's going to have a harder time letting light through, even on the lighter areas of the image. So it's really important that you find a happy medium there. And that's something that I will explain, like I said, in this future how-to video, because I think it's important to go through and show you really how easy it is. I'm using Aspire to make my Lithophanes, but I know that that's a $2,000 program and is most likely out of reach for most home hobby CNC users. So the other program that you could use, which is much less expensive, is Vectric. They call it PhotoVCarve. And that's a program that's designed to do just that, to take the image and turn it into a 3D toolpath that will allow you to create a Lithafane. So that's something that what I'll probably do in the video is I will most likely show it in that program and not in Aspire, just so that it's more within reach for most people. So essentially, it's funny that I was just reading something the other day, and I always like to find out where a word or where an idea originally comes from. And the word Lithafane is a Greek word, and it actually means light in stone or pier in stone. And it's interesting because that's essentially what we're doing. We're taking a piece of light stone like Corian or Candlestone, and we are etching out a photograph that when you light it back up, it lights up, and then that image will appear. So it's pretty cool. And there's a lot of different uses for Lithophanes. The one that I'm working on for a gift will actually be a photograph that will be framed. So I actually have a 5x7 frame that I bought, and I'm going to, instead of putting a picture in the frame, I'll put the Lithafane that I create in there, and then I will make a small box to attach to the back of the picture frame with a light in it, and I'll put a switch and a wire so it can be plugged into the wall. So that's kind of what I'm looking at doing. Some people use them for lampshades or window panels. I know that they said that some German beer jugs that used to use translucent bases that they turned into 3D pictures once the beer had been drunk. So I thought that was interesting, especially because Stepcraft is a German company. So I guess I got to go and interrogate the guys over the seas and, find out more about these beer jugs. At the very least, we've got to do some testing on that. one other idea I saw for Lithophanes that were kind of cool was you buy a plug-in wall nightlight, and they have these ones where they're kind of square and it's got a light bulb behind it, and the square piece is nothing more than a piece of like translucent white plexiglass, and you could actually take that off and make the same size, a Lithaphane that size, and replace the plexiglass with the Lithophane. So when the nightlight comes on, it's actually a photograph, which I thought was really cool. And I saw a lot of people that are doing that online as well. So that's something else that I may take a look at trying to replicate and perhaps do a video to show everybody how that's done as well. But so that's some examples of what you can do with a Lithophane and, kind of where the whole concept came from. Now, again, materials, I had talked about using 1/4-inch white Corian, and I also talked about using Candlestone. Now, there's another material you could use, which would be a white translucent plexiglass or acrylic. It's pretty cheap and it's widely available. The biggest problem with those materials that I've found is that they're definitely more difficult to machine, and especially acrylic, for this type of thing. I've just, I can do it and it works fine, but when you put a piece of Candlestone in the machine, it cuts. It just cuts really easily. There's not a huge strain on the CNC or the spindle. It does make a crazy amount of not dust, but they're like little flakes that chip off as you're cutting, and they stick to everything. So I definitely recommend that when you're doing a Lithophane, you want to make sure you have some sort of an exhaust adapter or a vacuum attachment connected to your CNC, because these little white things, will stick to everything and they'll make a mess. So, definitely use that. Now, the types of tools that you use to create a Lithophane are, you're going to need a ball nose cutter, a ball nose end mill. And generally speaking, the smaller the design, the smaller the cutter diameter it's required to ensure that you get the maximum detail machined into each piece. So the larger the cutter diameter, the less material the less detail you're going to have in the material. A 3-inch ball nose cutter, in my opinion, gives a good level of detail, and significantly cuts down on the production time. And I was cutting a 8x10 Lithophane, and I think that worked pretty well for that. Now, when I shrunk it to a 5x7, I actually when you light the image up, it looks a little blurry. So that's telling me that I needed to engrave or mill out more detail. So what I ended up doing was I created 2 finished tool paths. I have one for the 1/8-inch ball nose cutter that went through and it machined everything out, and because it's a little larger, it took less time to do that. Then I went back with a 1/16 inch or 1.5 millimeter ball nose cutter and ran a second finishing tool path, and that got in and just created a tremendous amount of detail in the image. It was actually pretty incredible. So however, that being said, this is not a quick process. Even on a big machine, it doesn't really matter the size machine, whether it's industrial or not. It's still a slow process, because as the end mill is moving across the material, you got to think about all these little details. So the Z-axis is constantly moving up and down as the X and Y are moving, and because of that, just the nature of it's slower to machine. To give you an example, a 5x7 Lithophane that I did, I was running at full speed in the machine. It took about 2.5 hours for the first finish pass. And then when I switched to a 16th inch, it took almost 4 hours. So it's a long process. the end results are amazing. So if this is something that you're looking to do for a business, I definitely recommend you doing a couple of these to get a real good idea as to how long it's going to take for a given size, because you want to make sure that you incorporate that into your pricing structure so that if you have a business, you're actually making money with this, and you've kind of taken that all into consideration. Now, after you create your Lithafame, the next thing that you need to look at, obviously, is you have to backlight it. So there's a lot of different ways that I've seen people do it. And the way that I'm doing it, I went to Michael's Crafts, or you can go to Walmart or wherever, whoever sells picture frames. And I found a wood frame that I really like. And what I'm going to do is, you have to keep in mind when you buy a frame that it's not just a piece of paper like a photograph that you're putting in there. It's going to be thicker, potentially up to 1/4 of an inch. So you need to make sure that there's a recess for the image that is at least at depth. So that's one thing that you want to do. Now you can, of course, make modifications to the back of the frame because nobody's really going to see it. Some people use glass. So if the frame has glass, you can put the Lithafame behind the glass and it gives you more of a reflective look. In my case, I'm not doing that. I'm taking the glass out as well. So the Lithafame is going to recess in flush. And since it's a wooden frame, all I'm doing is using some 1/4 inch plywood. I've designed out on Cut2D the pieces to make a box to cover the back of the 5x7 area where the photo or the Lithafame is. So that then what I did was I try to figure out how I want, most picture frames, if you're going to put them on a desk, like freestanding, they have that little tab that you fold out in the back, like a leg. And it typically angles the frame slightly backwards, obviously, so that it doesn't fall forward. So you have to keep that in mind too. If you're going to create a Lithafame out of a picture frame, you want to make sure that when you make the box on the back, you have some sort of accounted for a leg, so you get the right angle when it's sitting there on the shelf or on your mantle or wherever. You don't want it to be too sharp back, because then it's looking upward, but you don't want it to be too vertical either, because then you run the risk of it falling over, and if it falls on the floor, it could smash and break it. So keep that in mind when you create a rear enclosure for it. The other thing is the light. I like to use LED lights because you can get LED light strips relatively inexpensive online, and they come in a spool. There's a light every inch or so on the strip, and every 3 or 4 inches there's a set of contacts. So all you need to do, if you wanted to make, say, 3 rows of lights, you can cut 3 strips of the LED strips and then solder wires from each strip and then to a power supply. The LED strips are typically 12 volts, so you could use a standard 12 volt hobby power supply or something you would buy at Radio Shack, or maybe you have some lying around from an old cordless phone or something like that. So that's really all you need for that. Some people use light bulbs, like an incandescent bulb. I found that when you use an incandescent bulb, they do work, but you end up getting a hotter spot kind of in the center where the bulb is. So I like the fact that the light is more even when you're using LED strips, because you don't have any specific hot spots on there. So that's something to consider. Also, when you wire these in, you want to make sure that you have some sort of an on-off switch to it as well, because you don't want to leave it on all the time, or maybe you do, but just either way, that'll save you from having to unplug it and plug it back in. A simple lamp cord, or a simple on-off switch. You can even buy switches, like I said, at Radio Shack for a couple dollars that you can incorporate into the back of the box, so you can have a switch right on it. So, I mean, that's pretty much the overview of what a Lithafame is. I'll put a couple example photos up on the show notes. And like I said, in the next week or two, I will have a video that explains how to do it using PhotoVCarve from Vectric and using 1/4 inch Candlestone on a Stepcraft machine. So I'm kind of excited to do that because I think it's a really neat application. Like I said, you have to be patient because they do take a while to produce, but the end result is amazing. And, when you make one, and it's a great gift idea too, because when somebody's looking at it, they're a little thrown off, but once you hit that light, it's pretty amazing. So anyway, that was pretty much what I want to talk about this week. I thank you for joining me. Please look for some information on the show notes page at ucreatepodcast.com/009. And I will have a notification going out for the video once that is finished. And also, please, I encourage you to download a free copy of the book that I just wrote, Starting a Business with a Stepcraft Machine. And you can get that at www.stepcraft.us/ebook. So thanks again for joining me this week, and I look forward to talking to you soon. If I don't get another show out before the holidays, I wish everybody a very happy holiday and a happy new year.